or small function. All right, cool. Good to know in the tech space. All right, let's kick things off. Okay, super excited to talk to you about market making. And just before I dive into it, a little bit about myself. My name is Denham. I'm co-founder of Float Capital. Previously co-founded Wildcards, a platform for endangered animal conservation. And I come from a background in dev and economics. In this chat, I'm going to unpack a little bit about what is market making. Super simple. A little bit of a shill on Float Capital as a venue for market making. A super simple code example. If you've never touched code before, you should still be able to read it. And then a little bit of market making, modeling, and simulation. Cool. Market making, or magic money makers, as I like to call it, is often seen as quite a highly technical, complex field. And although that's really true, at its kind of base principles, it's really actually quite a simple kind of concept. So I'm going to explain market making with an example. Now, we've got Jason, a market maker here, and John, a market taker. Now, it's important to realize what their kind of goals are. In this case, Jason, the market maker, wants to make returns, whether that's APY yield or any kind of different way of making money. He wants to make bags. John, the market taker, he has USDC, but he wants to swap it for AVAX. Okay, that's the kind of setup. Then we have a Trader Joe swap pool. If you're not familiar with Trader Joe, it's really cool. It's kind of a one-stop decentralized shop on Avalanche. And you can essentially swap tokens in a pool. So you can swap your USDC for AVAX against that pool. And in this example, the market maker, Jason, he provides USDC and AVAX into a pool. And this creates the market. It's really quite simple. He makes the market for John, the market taker, to swap his USDC for AVAX. Okay, and he does this because beyond kind of being very interested in the DeFi space, he wants to make a return of 0.25% on the trading fees, which is paid by John as a small kind of premium in order to make the trade. So in this case, they really are quite closely tied together, and the relationship between the market maker and market taker provides the ecosystem for the other. One thing we didn't kind of mention here is that Jason, the market maker, he is exposed to the price of AVAX in this case. Now, there might be a case where Jason's looking at it thinking, okay, I've looked at the projections and I think the price of AVAX might go down next month, all right? And so he's exposed to the price of AVAX. And this might erode away at his returns. So he might be disincentivized to provide liquidity or market make. And this is where something called going delta neutral comes in. You might have seen it. It's quite common in the space to see people talking about it on Twitter or different Discords. Super simple as well. Delta meaning kind of a change, and neutral being impartial to the change. So in this case, it means being neutral to the change in price, which means effectively holding a long position, expecting the price to go up, and an equivalent short position, expecting the price to go down, which means any gain on the one side is offset by a loss on the other side. So you're making 0 returns, but at the same time, 0 losses. And in this case, where Jason is kind of exposed to the price of AVAX, he might have to exit the pool, but if he goes delta neutral by putting some liquidity into a short position, he can effectively hold a delta neutral position and reduce his exposure to price. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into these, but there are lots of different market making strategies, lots of different venues. When I say venue, it can be like FTX, Trader Joe, different kind of locations where you can make trades. We're going to be talking a little bit about funding rate arbitrage, and we'll touch on that. So pretty simple in concept, but it can be a lot more technical than that. Usually it's seen as kind of risk-free rewards, mostly in the sense of price. It's a bit of a misnomer because there's venue risk, availability risk, smart contract risk, but there's kind of money on the table to be made, and so naturally it becomes highly competitive, and the smartest actor in a market-making strategy kind of wins. Okay, cool. just going to jump into float a little bit and give you a little bit of background and then discuss it as kind of a venue for trading. So float capital is a decentralized perpetual derivatives protocol. Another way of saying it is we allow people to go long or short on any kind of different arbitrary asset. This is a screenshot from the site. You can see there's a few different markets. We currently host 10 different markets. You can trade Spell, which is going quite nuts at the moment. But what's quite cool is you can take both a long and a short position. And if you're not familiar with that, it means you can essentially bet on the price going up, but you can also bet on the price going down. And we use a slightly different novel mechanism in the background. And I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think it's important to understand maybe a slight aspect to it, because I'm trying to emphasize why there's a case for market makers to get involved where they can actually make really good returns, and why it's really appealing for a market maker, because these markets are kind of well primed for implementing these strategies. So we have a market, let's say AVAX, and we have a long pool and a short pool, and people deposit their money bags into the two different pools, and it mints them a token representing their long position or short position of that pool. Okay? Now, when the price go up, there's a transfer of value from the short pool to the long pool. All right? And without diving too deep into this, essentially, let me skip one ahead. There becomes a case where there might be more demand on the one side of the market to the other. And in this case, we get something called floating exposure. And this is, I don't have to dive into this too much, but it results in kind of an underexposed situation to the market. And really what I want to pinpoint here is that APR on the right. So in a case like this, where there's more long liquidity than short liquidity, we have a scenario where there's a really strong funding rate APR. So this is to incentivize market makers to take that side of the market. Cool. I'm going to run through the code a little bit, and it's going to be super simple. We're going to look at implementing a market making strategy. We are a little bit pressed for time, so it will kind of be a bit quick, but and more of kind of showing you. But we're implementing a strategy and essentially taking a short position on float capital, taking a long position by buying the tokens via decentralized exchange, such as Trader Joe, and by doing so, holding a delta neutral position, so no exposure to the price movements of the market, but at the same time capitalizing on the yield that gets generated from the funding rate. And so even if you've never touched code before, this is quite kind of intuitive. Firstly, we do some setup stuff. Then after that, we open a short position on float capital. And then after that, we open a long position on Trader Joe. And then we effectively have a kind of a system in place that maintains that delta neutral position. And I'm going to dive into one of the sections on how to open a short position. Let's make it a bit bigger. Is there a way to turn the lights off? Let me see. Is this an option? Cool. Better. All right. Let me come back quickly. So effectively, this is the program, and we do some setup stuff. After that, we open a short position on float capital. And once that's done, we open a long position on Trader Joe. And finally, we maintain that delta neutral position. So I'm going to unpack this, opening the short position on float capital, opening the long position on Trader Joe. Super simple, just like you would kind of do it in a manual strategy if you were going to interact with the code through kind of MetaMask or through a UI. Naturally, the first step is to approve your tokens before you can deposit. So we've got this approve contract spend, and then we implement this long-short contract, which is the float capital contract, and we mint short next price, which is minting a short position on float capital. Now, super simple, super straightforward code. A couple of transactions. This entire file is 144 lines of code. The logic's not too complex. Really, the stuff that looks a bit Hong Kong, if you don't have if you're not familiar with the code, is really this kind of setup stuff, and it's integrating with Ether's library. And then, so that's kind of step one. And then the next step we want to look at is opening a long position. So opening a long position, this involves going to Trader Joe, which is a kind of DEX, a decentralized trading protocol, but you could also use any different kind of venue. So when I talk about a venue, I'm talking about somewhere that you can open kind of the inverse position. So you could also trade through FTX or any kind of protocol where you can buy spot for certain strategies or leverage products as well. And in this case, we go to the AMM and we swap exact tokens for tokens, and we effectively buy the long tokens. So I've got this ready in the terminal to give attempt to run, and I'm just going to say yarn make money, but knowing transactions, we might see some issues here. So first off, I connect to the Avalanche blockchain. I'm connecting to the Joe market. That's the strategy I'm implementing it on. Connected with this wallet, we've got this kind of balance, and it's submitting a transaction at the moment. I hope the gas prices aren't acting to network congestion, and we'll let that run for a little bit. And I'm going to come back to this kind of slide here. And the next thing I want to talk about is the modeling around this, thanks to Wusang and Stent on our team. And the goal of this graph, of what we're plotting here, is to identify whether the market making makes returns. So this is a simulation that's based on historical price data. On the x-axis, we have kind of this 2-month period, and on the top graph, we have the market makers' positions. So I think in blue, taking a short position, and in red, taking a long position, and you can see that there's opportunities in the market to make trades, and you can see that over time, on a dollar amount and a percentage-based return, there is an increase in the returns of about 9% over 2 months, which is quite good. Naturally, this is a fresh market, and there aren't a lot of market makers in the market. What tends to happen is the returns will tend towards zero as you have more actors. And what happens, this creates a more efficient ecosystem for market takers. So what happens is there's a benefit to the entire protocol, where market makers are making returns, and market takers get a better environment in which to trade, implement their own strategies, hold tokens for different purposes or periods. And there's lots of different use cases. I mean, a simple one, if you come from a dev background and you're working on Avalanche, and you've been hit by the recent kind of gas prices spiking, or you bullish on AVAX and you think in the long run the price is going to go up, but you purchased a whole bunch to pay for gas fees, you can take a short position on float capital and essentially hedge out your gas fees. So there's lots of different use cases in kind of making these strategies. And I'm not going to talk through this whole slide, but the kind of what I'm trying to emphasize here is that the market making is profitable as a strategy, and it results in more balanced pools. And there's lots of different market making strategies. Some of them aren't always delta neutral. Sometimes there's projections on the price of AVAX, and they can make market making strategies based on the modeled future price. Also really fascinating, because that's another kind of interesting vector on the strategy. And another kind of example is in this Joe example now, that 9% return over the 2-month period. So this is the ETH market. You could take the spot long ETH tokens that you purchased through an AMM, and you could stake that, or you could, for example, the Joe market, you could earn stake Joe, or so there's ways to make yield on the capital that's holding the long delta neutral position as well, and really supercharges yield. Cool. Here's a slide that's not too pertinent to the topic, but just a cool one, and I can come back to it when we come to questions. I do want to mention that there are a lot of other things to factor in when trying to implement these strategies, and most of it comes around to creating, so the logic is simple, but creating a system that's robust enough to recover in the case of certain aspects. Gas fees will erode away at your returns. Network congestion and can make it a little bit difficult. We can come back to that in a sec. Venue uptime and availability. This is obviously not as big an issue in the decentralized space when you're using kind of Trader Joe's as a venue for trading against, but it can, when there's massive amounts of demand, these systems can go down and you could be stuck in your position. Impermanent loss, reality with AMMs, price slippage, absolute versus percentage returns, and volatility decay. I'm going to open the floor to some questions. This transaction seems to be stuck, but I was expecting something along the lines of that, and so I have I've got a previous run of the transaction being submitted, created, the balance afterwards, and the gas used. Thanks so much for listening to my presentation. If there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
Is there any way to hedge against the impermanent loss?
Great question. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that. I have heard of different methods of doing it, but yeah. Which MM? Yeah. So I think what's quite interesting there is, as if you're using any kind of counter venue, you can use whatever AMM. Generally, I would say to choose the one with the best kind of liquidity or the most liquidity, because you'll have the least price slippage, and generally it'll be kind of the most cost-effective venue to trade against. I think in the Avalanche ecosystem, Trader Joe is pretty fantastic for that. But yeah, you'll get different, depending on kind of what the pair that you want to trade, there might be different venues that have more liquidity. Yeah, sure. So this is a little bit about how kind of the system works. And we effectively use kind of a next price execution. So Chainlink are our Oracle providers, and they give us a price feed. And when a user creates a mint request, it's added to a batch. And to prevent front running or being able to see prices off-chain before they come on-chain, we effectively allow them to come in at the next price. So we call it next price execution. And then this mint request will be batched together, and the magic internet asset is created and received to the user. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, everyone.